Hi, everyone. My name is JCrego, and this is my Safe Schools Communities research topic and program proposal. So, my program proposal is on exclusionary discipline in early childhood environments. And the purpose of my program is to decrease the need to employ these measures when responding to challenging and unsafe student behavior. Research strongly shows that this approach is counterproductive and can actually severely impact a child's trajectory. So, exclusionary discipline refers to removing or excluding a student from their usual education environment. So, in school and out of school suspensions and even expulsion. This is a prevalent reaction to student discipline and an approach schools and programs use to address safety. So, data from the 2021-22 school survey on crime and safety reports these behaviors on the left as being issues in schools. So, students being disruptive or creating disorder in instructional spaces, students showing abuse towards peers and adults. Actually, this last one here, disrespect for teachers, that had the highest percentage on the school survey. So this data point just makes me curious about relationships, which will be a foundational component in my program proposal. Research strongly suggests, as I mentioned at the beginning, that harsh punishment is ineffective and fosters harm to children and families. So when exclusionary practices are employed, here are some of the consequences that can come out of that. It can actually increase a student's behavioral problems. We see deficits in social and emotional development. Of no surprise, there's a decline in academic success because the child is not in the instructional space to develop skills and knowledge. Students are 10 times more likely to drop out of high school when they experience exclusionary discipline. And the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2013 actually linked expulsion and suspension to involvement in our juvenile justice system. Here are the student populations likely at risk to experience exclusionary discipline. All of these groups will be highlighted further when we have a look at the research and data. I want to briefly bring up again the 2021-22 school survey on crime and safety to acknowledge the obstacles schools and teachers reported they have. So on the left here, these factors were in the top 3 percentages regarding what is limiting school and teachers' efforts to create safe conditions. So inadequate funding, inconsistency in policy and systems, and lack of supports for challenging behavior that students are demonstrating. Interestingly, one of the factors that schools and teachers reported as having less of an impact to create safe conditions was a lack of teacher training in classroom management. That was at the bottom as not really being an area of need. I say interestingly because research shows that this is a high need area for safety improvement in schools, and I want to bring that up because my program will address professional learning for teachers when it comes to supporting students who are demonstrating challenging behavior. Inadequate access to mental health professionals also carried significant weight on that survey when schools reported efforts, but it was in a different section of the survey. I want to share this quote from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So I am going to read it. Expelling is not an intervention. Rather, it disrupts the learning process, increases inequality, and hides the child and family from access to meaningful supports. The National Association for the Education of Young Children strongly believes that exclusionary, disciplinary employment threatens student development of stable, caring, supportive relationships with their educators. And these are conditions that we know children thrive in. So with that said, let's look at some data regarding this problem. So there's a lot of information on this slide, so I do just want to highlight some of the data that shows the disproportionate high rates of exclusionary discipline practices that are employed in early childhood environments. So as you can see here, an earlier survey from 2005 showed that preschoolers are 3.2 times, are at a rate of 3.2 times higher experiencing expulsion than K through 12 students. So I found that to be quite alarming. In this survey here, the 2016, it's showing not improvement in data when it's coming to preschoolers specifically. This national survey showed that roughly 250 preschoolers per day were being suspended or expelled. This civil rights data collection investigation showed that boys represent 54% of the preschool population, but 79% of preschoolers who are suspended once and 82% of preschoolers suspended more than once. So as far as populations at risk, we know that boys are more likely to experience exclusionary discipline. And this next survey here at the end, also civil rights data collection, points to children with disabilities and how they're being expelled at rates greater than their peers. In addition to children with disabilities and boys experiencing this issue at higher rates, we also see racial disparities in the early years. So if you look here at the yellow bar, Black and African American students um, only represent 18% of preschool enrollment. We see that here in the first column. So though they only represent 18% of total enrollment, they represent 42% of preschool students suspended once and 48% of students suspended multiple times. So again, these are for Black and African American students, so that's for males and females. Now I'd like to share some peer-reviewed work that shares a bit more of data around this issue as well as informing my program creation. So Mayer and Astor, in their work, they also highlight the disproportionate high rates of exclusionary discipline practices employed not in preschool, but in K through 12 towards Black males and females, students with disabilities, and also LGBTQ plus students. So Mayer and Astor state most, if not all, research on reducing school violence and disruption point to the need for a positive school climate. My proposal aligns with an authoritative model. My program proposal offers a balanced, consistent approach that employs firmness with fairness and multiple student supports when we think about supporting students cognitively, socially, and emotionally, and behaviorally. Mayer and Astor champion these research-driven strategies here on the right, which influenced the framework of my program. My program will have a focus on positive, proactive discipline, a heavy focus on relationships built on authentic connection and clear communication. As I mentioned, multiple supports for students. And as I get into my program, you will also see how there's a focus on equity and the program being data-driven. Williams and Yogman in this article, this was published in the American Academy of Pediatrics. Again, just like Mayer and Astor, this work highlights how expulsion disproportionately impacts children with disabilities, those from socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, and children of color. And additionally, this research really adds that element to consider things that are out of a child's control that correlates to early brain development and that can cause challenging student behavior. So students might be in a chronically stressed environment. They might be experiencing trauma. And these are things that are happening outside of a preschool program or outside of a school setting. And it's important for us as educators to be cognizant of it because these adverse experiences might be causing some of the disruptive behavior, but we need to understand the root causes of why the behavior is happening and how we can support students, not punitively, but appropriately support them. So this article makes me think about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which prompts us to consider environmental context for our students. This third study was influential in the creation of my program. So in this study, researchers investigated preschoolers. Actually, there was 190 preschoolers, 76% of which were boys, that participated in this study. And these 190 preschoolers were evaluated by their caregivers and teachers, and their data showed that they demonstrated at-risk or elevated levels of some of these behaviors that we are seeing here. So externalizing behavior problems can display as attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and conduct disorder. Some participants had conduct problems, so they displayed aggression, defiance, antisocial behavior. And this last one here is really important, callous unemotional traits. So children who displayed low levels of guilt, empathy, and care for others. And what's important to note about this behavior is it can be identified quite early. And these traits have been found to be a predictor of later externalizing behavior problems and conduct problems. So in this 8-week summer intervention program, when a child displayed one of these behaviors, they were given a 3-minute timeout. And researchers collected data on whether using timeout was an effective consequence for students to change their behavior. So most children did experience decreased minutes, so needing the consequence less as the program went on. However, most important to note are these callous unemotional traits. Children that had these behaviors, their timeout actually increased as the program continued. And this data is consistent with past research showing that children that demonstrate callous unemotional traits are less sensitive to punishment. This is important for educators to note when they are trying to employ behavioral systems within their classrooms and when they're considering effectiveness of those measures. In this study, this was another 8-week summer program in which researchers had 3 different intervention models that participants were a part of. And the preschoolers, these were preschoolers that were going to be transitioning into kindergarten. So the 3 intervention models were readiness programs. And the first one was your traditional readiness class where there was a heavy focus on academics. The second one had the traditional approach, but added some behavioral systems within the environment. And the third setting, contained the academics, behavioral modification systems, as well as a focus on social, emotional, and self-regulation training. Unsurprisingly, the students that were in that last group that benefited from instruction around social and emotional intelligence and self-regulation and executive function skills had an increase in positive outcomes regarding reducing negative behaviors. We do see the transition from pre-K to kindergarten can be different. The kindergarten setting has more social demands with increased academics and expectations of children to be more independent. So students that struggle with behavioral difficulties, especially executive function, we can see increased problems once they enter the K settings. I want to take a moment to just talk about executive function. When I'm saying executive function, I'm talking about that mental skill set that impacts thoughts, emotions, and actions. So when we think about being able to regulate ourselves, to regulate our emotions, to be able to attend and focus even when other things might be happening around us. And also, when we're talking about executive function, that cognitive skill to control impulses. Practicing inhibition can be hard for young children, but it's important for them to do that when they're in a setting with many peers and many things that are happening around them. And executive function and social emotional intelligence are really paramount brain regions when we consider healthy development, day-to-day functioning, like I said, interacting with peers and adults, and just overall well-being. So this research really helped to inform my proposal and ensuring that I had these important elements a part of my program for students, but also for teachers to have this knowledge and research to better support their students. Excuse me. This is my final peer-reviewed research, which was a study that aimed to measure the effectiveness of implementing a parent program in a pre-K setting. And they gauged the impact on student outcomes later when they were in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. So this was a large sample. And the research was conducted in Title I schools, which I think is important to note, because Title I schools enroll populations from low income households typically. Though qualitative data didn't affect outcomes pertaining to exclusionary discipline practices, qualitative data reveals positive student outcomes, um, such as that increased executive function, which we just talked about being critical to positive outcomes, a decrease in those challenging behaviors that teachers see, and improved parent involvement and support, which we know is also critical to student outcomes. So this study was valuable for me to consider the partnerships in my proposal, which will be another foundational piece. So all these studies helped to inform the components of my proposal that I will share now. So my program is aimed at building teacher knowledge and being preventative when it comes to challenging student behavior by using evidence-based sound pedagogical practices. From those five peer-reviewed studies, I wanted to make sure that including research backed behavior management strategies that were effective, as well as social emotional learning curriculum to promote children's social emotional intelligence, executive function skills, pro-social behaviors, and really remembering that callous unemotional trait and making sure I'm helping students develop empathy as they develop their own skill set. The New York State Education Department characterizes early learning as providing education to students in pre-K through third grade. So you will see in my prevention program that it spans across this 5-year period. The implementation phase will be for participants in pre-kindergarten through grade 1. And the evaluation phase will be for students in grades 2 through grade 3. I developed program pillars as a framework to span across this longitudinal study. So let me share those pillars with you now. Excuse me. So this visual I created really serves as a framework for my program's objective, which is to decrease the use of exclusionary discipline in early childhood environments. So in silos, each of these pillars are paramount. However, you will see that they are really interconnected. They're all pivotal and working with one another with the main goal of promoting student safety and well-being. So this is my prevention program, sort of how I envision it to work. Who is participating? This program will be offered to all students either entering pre-K or kindergarten in the district. This is the implementation phase. There will be a program team with a lead director working closely with families and community organizations. There will be an 8-week summer intervention that participants entering either pre-K or kindergarten that they will participate in to help develop social and emotional intelligence, executive function skills, and really begin to develop those important interactions with peers and adults with scaffolds to promote positive and pro-social behavior. A part of this proposal team will be opportunities for parents and caregivers to attend some learning sessions around child development and being able to support behavior at home. Where will this program take place? So the 8-week summer program can take place at a district-chosen elementary school site. And the ongoing implementation will take place in pre-K through grade 3 schools district-wide. This will allow for the director and team members of the prevention program to coach teachers in evidence-based pedagogical practices to support social and emotional learning and pro-social behaviors. This will happen school-wide in those pre-K through grade 3 settings. The team and director, in addition to ensuring that curriculum is steady, will also really keep a laser focus on these pillars, ensuring that each of them are running strong in these pre-K through grade 3 settings. The director and team will also be active in schools collecting not only student data, but school-wide climate data, because as we know from Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, that will have an impact on these students who are in that implementation phase, participating in that 8-week program and transitioning into their school spaces when the school year starts. A variety of research tools will be used to evaluate this program over the course of 5 years to really not only, again, track that student data, but components of the program and overall effectiveness. Why do we need this prevention program? As I mentioned throughout this presentation, research shows us that schools must have a comprehensive and multifaceted approach towards school safety and ensuring student well-being. This program specifically provides a lens into early childhood development, preventative intervention measures that we can take. And the research really shows us that we need to be cognizant of this program being equitable and data informed. Funding will be important for this prevention program. A team will need to be established. There will need to be multiple supports, as research tells us is important. So ensuring that mental health staffing is a part of this program and collaborating with the director and educational stakeholders. Supports also need to include professional development for not just the team members that will be a part leading those 8-week sessions, but professional development for the teachers that will be absorbing these students to allow for that continuous instruction around SEL and executive function. And that professional learning includes the teachers, but also the school staff members, because we know they impact student interactions. Um, we're going to need resources to provide materials for the 8-week summer program, as well as materials for other learning sessions, such as the care parent sessions that we would be looking to do. Data tracking tools will need funding will support that. Potential digital tools and media that will be needed when we're on site observing students and teachers' instructional practices. These are some of the prevention program highlights. I did talk a bit about this 8-week summer readiness program, that really those peer-reviewed research articles sort of influenced me to create that 8-week program, with that focus on social emotional competence, executive function. There will be a focus on play, early literacy, and STEM opportunities for students to engage in. Excuse me. The parent program that was also in the in the peer reviewed articles, also was influential in me adding that component to this prevention program. The partnerships that would be established with parents and caregivers would, of course, have a focus on students' well-being. It would get parents and caregivers into the school participating alongside their students and different opportunities throughout the school year. Building parent and caregiver knowledge on child development and positive disciplinary practices that they can use at home, and also connect them with early intervention and community resources that might support their particular child. As I mentioned, this is a longitudinal study, so really tracking the effectiveness and student outcomes across a 5-year period. And this last one is a big highlight because it's really aimed at all stakeholders that will be a part of this 5-year plan. We all need to think about how we teach children. Even if we're just a staff member in a school, we are teaching students just by the simple language and behavior that we use as we move across the school. All of us need to have a lens that we are continuously learning best practices to support our students and families. And really, this program will ensure that supports that we know are critical to not only teacher and parent success, but student outcomes will be a part of this program to optimize outcomes. How can we strengthen those program pillars? As I mentioned, those program pillars are really the framework that needs to be a part of everything that's done across this 5-year period. A strong lens on relationships, not just with students, but relationships with families and community organizations, and relationships across school-wide, so between staff, between leadership, really ensuring that we can strengthen that pillar by being honest and actively listening to one another and supporting one another, especially when it could be challenging. Using children's literature to build relationships with students and really gauging their interests and seeing them as a whole child. can strengthen relationships with students, ensuring that this consistency pillar is implemented. And when it's not, when inconsistency occurs, it is being addressed by the program director and leadership within the school settings that we will be working in. So before the program even starts, clear, consistent policy and systems regarding student behavior and discipline will be set, and everyone involved will sign off on their understanding of that once it is presented to them. This pillar, cycle of teaching, practice, and feedback, is critical. It's critical because we need to take a lens of not just expelling a student or employing an out of school suspension when disorderly conduct or challenging behavior occurs with a young child. Again, thinking about what could be the possible root of this behavior. Does this child have the supports that they need? Really ensuring as educators that we're being explicit in teaching what our expectations are and continuously providing positive but productive feedback, not telling the child, good job, or you're not doing what I want you to. Being explicit with our language, ensuring that our environments are safe and that our students are regulated to interact with others, to develop themselves as a learner, which is the purpose of school. We need to strengthen that cycle of instruction, practice, and feedback for our students. Important to note is that there is an expectation in this program that pedagogical practices are multifaceted and include other domains such as art, music, play, mindfulness, nature, all of those instructional methods that we know children can thrive in. The communication pillar is, again, paramount, ensuring that we're consistent and clear, cognizant of the language we use, and that this pillar is really built on respect, trust, and empathy with all of the stakeholders we're communicating with, not just the students. And as I mentioned, the partnerships that will be established with families, with community organizations, with the professional learning organizations that will help drive the learning that our stakeholders need to develop, will be important. I want to take 1 minute to talk about that professional learning that I think is essential to the success of this program proposal. These two learning sessions will be mandatory for all educators and staff that will be a part of this program proposal. So I'll start with this one on the right here for executive function. I've been mentioning it throughout this whole program, but we really need teachers and adults working in early childhood environments and school settings to be cognizant of how we can support the development of these mental skill sets that really drive actions, thoughts, and behaviors. So a learning session will take place, excuse me, for a training session, will take place for that, and will really include not just all students, but especially those students that we know demonstrate challenging behavior and are not regulated and are causing disruption in instructional spaces that might be hurting peers and teachers. How can we ensure the safety of not just all the students in our care, but especially those students that need extra support. How can we support them while ensuring they're inclusive in these instructional spaces and their school experience, to be honest, and not excluding them with those disciplinary measures? In addition to that learning session, there will be a mandatory learning session, excuse me, on how we can build teacher and staff's cultural competence. We have diverse children that are in our educational spaces, and we need to be cognizant of implicit biases that we might not realize are informing our actions and interactions with our students. As the data showed throughout this presentation, there's a disproportionate high rate of exclusionary measures used towards students of color, boys, students with disabilities. But when we think about cultural competence and race, I want to bring up this last study here from 2016 that was conducted with the Yale Child Study Center, in which they utilized eye scan technology to really gauge where teachers were looking when they were watching a video of an early childhood environment. And they were told to look for negative behavior that was occurring. What they didn't know, what researchers didn't tell them, is that actually in the video, there is no negative behavior occurring. However, the teachers reported a high rate of Black children, more so than white children, specifically African American boys, that were doing things that were wrong in the video. And so this is just important to think about for all educators and staff as we try to promote equitable practices, equitable education, and equitable opportunity for all children. So building our cultural competence, building our cultural awareness of the children and families that we work with is critical to the success of this program. Lastly, I just want to share this quote, which I do think is important because it goes back to Brothenbrenner's ecological systems theory. This is really hard work when we are in educational spaces and students are coming from a variety of different cultures and households and socioeconomic experiences. We don't have control over that as educators. What we do have control over is when they're with us in our programs, in our school settings, and we need to ensure that we are creating positive spaces using research-driven instructional practices with differentiated supports to promote and optimize, number one, safety in our settings, but student positive development and wellness when they're in our spaces. It's very hard work, but it's necessary work. And I think that this program proposal could really launch these positive outcomes and prove that we do not need to employ exclusionary disciplinary practices when we as the adults are doing the right thing for children and families. These are the references used for this presentation. And thank you for viewing and considering my proposal.